While they have many children to take care of, there's no doubt that Chainsaw Man is MAPPA's favourite. Even though they adopted Attack on Titan and raised Kakegurui to the ripe old age of 2 seasons and a spin-off, they chose to raise Chainsaw Man differently, paying for its college funds outright and buying it a house while leaving its siblings to go take loans from Aniplex, Avex and Universal. Hell, they forgot to even pick up the Yuri on Ice movie from school. In a way, it makes sense. Chainsaw Man isn't just a big seller jump series, it's hugely critically acclaimed as well. Yet, this kind of special treatment is still atypical for anime studios. Usually, even with popular properties, it can just be a case of what's feasible at the time, rather than what results in the best possible show. Or child. Whatever the metaphor was. But the point is, Chainsaw Man is stellar. The best possible creative team for a story that deserves it. A production committee consisting of just the studio, allowing them full control, not only over the creative side, but also the schedule. They didn't have anyone telling them when to air it or how many episodes. Instead, they could just model it around what works for their team, because it's that produces the best results. There's been a bit of drama over how Chainsaw Man should and shouldn't be adapted. The director, Ryu Nakayama, has been very open about wanting to emulate a live-action filmic look, pulling away from exaggeration or other cartoonish animation fundamentals. To put it simply, it's the direct opposite of Bocchi the Rock. Neither of them is an easy approach, and both require a lot of technical skill. The depiction of Bocchi's eccentricities is so unhinged that they need to constantly keep coming up with new and expressive visual ideas to keep the audience from ever getting complacent. At the same time, realism as a creative choice is dangerous, because the faults become fissures. It's something that constantly annoyed me about Blood of Zeus outside of its fight scenes. I'm watching these detailed characters tell me about the stakes, and all I can think is, wow, they look janky. But regardless of whether you feel this is the right approach for Chainsaw Man, they're taking every step with grace and poise. The motions are delicate, the expressions complex, the set pieces intimate. It's a digital first show created by many who you could safely refer to as being part of the web generation, a group of creators with a non-traditional path into the industry, having trained their skills online in forums and blogs so that when they did work on their first anime, they already had many of the required skills. However, quote, web generation is perhaps a misnomer these days, because it's not just one group. And so Chainsaw Man is an assembly of many different web generations across the past decade. Nakayama and the director of the opening, Shingo Yamashita, from those early days, but also animators from across the world who debuted as recently as the last few years. Jujutsu Kaisen animation producer Keisuke Sesshomo was in charge of bringing together the team, and he chose to step outside of MAPPA's usual pool. Generally, MAPPA shows are directed by Munehisa Sakai, Yuichiro Hayashi, Jun Shishido, and Sungho Park, with a few others getting promotions to the director's chair in recent years. Nakayama had only worked with MAPPA once on an episode of Jujutsu Kaisen, but producer Sesshomo knew him from long before that, and thought he could produce something different from what the studio was used to. And the two of them agreed that it would be best for Nakayama to be the one to hire animation staff, with a focus on bringing them in as employees rather than just freelancers. With Nakayama in charge here, a young animator in his own right, the hope is that he can do right by those MAPPA brings in for this project. In a sense, Chainsaw Man's all-star web generation crew has made it an ultimate modern anime. Along with both old and new MAPPA faces, there are a bunch of creative leads from across the industry, with credits on stuff like Mushoku Tensei, Flip Flappers, and FGO Babylonia. This team might have varying levels of experience, but they have a consistent level of talent. Nakayama may be a first-time series director, but he has a track record that proves he can do it.
仲良くできそう?
全然こいつクズですよ。
仲良くできそうでよかった。
I am a huge fan of Tatsuki Fujimoto. While Chainsaw Man took its time to grip me, it took but seconds for me to fall in love with Fire Punch. As a writer, he's someone that embraces gore, darkness and pain, but he's also not afraid to show how ridiculous he finds it all. There's a childish joy throughout his books, which at the same time should never be shown to children. Couple that with social messaging that in the case of Chainsaw Man addresses a search for decency and self-respect while poor, and you get a recipe for one of the most hyped up shows of the year. It's no mistake that the majority of the show's staff are of the same generation as Fujimoto, a generation that lived through the financial crisis and watched as housing became less affordable and wages stagnated. The author trusted this team, and while he was involved somewhat, he mostly left them to it, with his priority just being, make it good. MAPPA's boss has come out and said that their plan was to reproduce the manga as faithfully as possible, but that's not what they did. The animation producer instead tasked the team with not just recreating the original manga as is, but instead making a version that feels faithful on screen, even if it technically isn't. They've captured the spirit of the original, and like any good adaptation, reinterpreted it through a new creative lens. It's a manga fan's horror story, hearing that the creators are willing to make anime original scenes and change things from the source. But this is how the greatest of adaptations are made. Welcome to Ryu Nakayama's Chainsaw Man.
Cool.
The moment that sold me on his approach is in episode 4, right after the Leech Devil fight. In the manga, Aki says he has no intentions of becoming friends with Power, only for her to move in on the next page. It's one of the ways Fujimoto uses visual pacing for comedic effect. You can do the same thing in film. For instance, here's how I would have done it.
でも敵は敵。利用するだけです。慣れ合うつもりはないですよ。The next morning.
But instead, Tatsuya Yoshihara, and not an unfunny YouTuber, directed and storyboarded this episode, and crafted an entirely original sequence that digs deep into who Aki is through his morning routine. It's lovingly smooth, filled with small details and care, showing the ways in which he lives an orderly life. Then, when Power appears, punching a hole in the door, another anime original moment, we get what Aki's giving up. She throws vegetables on the floor, and we're not just reacting to how messy she is, we're shouting, hey! Aki just vacuumed that floor. It's not just adding things for the sake of adding things, it's going for the same reaction as the manga, but in a way that takes advantage of their skill sets. In the same way that Fujimoto gets us invested in Aki and his brother's dynamic through paneling and character expressions in chapter 13, the anime team is doing the same with smooth motions and intimate layouts in episode 5 here. It's a cute moment of sibling tension from Bono, the animator not the Beatle, and it's heartwarming. Until... there is little difference between comedic timing and horror timing. Hayato Kurosaki is known for animating big explosive moments like this one, and it works as a perfectly traumatizing contrast to Bono's work. This is something consistent across the anime. The manga achieves that feeling of surprise through sudden one-panel imagery, but the anime has to find its own ways. Personally, I wasn't sold on Chainsaw Man until chapter 22, the first big turning point where in just a couple panels, Makima and her aide go from chatting about lunch to being brutally shot. It doesn't matter that she comes back to life later, but in this moment it struck a chord with me, and because it felt so sudden, I just laughed. So when we got to episode 8, I was on the edge of my seat, and even though I knew it was coming, I laughed all over again. You know something's going to happen when they crouch down, but then we watch this guy tap on his phone for 12 seconds until you see this little gun poke out of the corner of the screen and shoot. The episode was directed by Shota Goshizono, an animator who I foolishly neglected to talk about in my FGO Babylonia video, and more recently has made a huge impact on 2 standout Ranking of Kings episodes. One of the things you'll notice pretty quickly is that he's a big fan of unconventional, at least for anime, camera techniques and 3D layouts. Often created in the free software Blender, these allow animators to emulate the benefits of 3D like complex camera movements and consistent character models, but keep the characters in 2D 3D by drawing over them later. My favourite example from episode 8 is this one, which I understand looks a little odd. It's not exactly easy to get things to feel consistent when the camera's drunk, but I love the ambition. It's not the kind of shot you expect from anime, but it is something you might expect in live action. A realistic approach only works if you have people who can achieve it, and that isn't a resource this team is short on.
超インテリ作戦開始じゃ。
Even if you're caught up on the manga, Chainsaw Man's anime is a treat. It's not like the countless other boring adaptations where things are faithful for a lack of better ideas. Sure, CSM will use panels from the manga, but there'll always be something else to enjoy. You get the Christmas present you expect, and then, as a bonus, Santa's filled the stockings with plenty of little chocolates. The con scene is that for me, and yes, I'm still talking about episode 8. We get this iconic shot from the book. In fact, we got it in the original PV. But then our first chocolate is this moment, again taking advantage of 3D space as the wall of our peaceful set falls apart. In the manga, I wasn't quite sure where Kon was positionally compared to the characters, but the anime makes that much clearer with the big dog speaking from above them, and it proves it with this exciting shot of Samurai Sword appearing from behind its disappearing head. From the second this show's staff was announced, we knew there would be great action. It's the perfect team for it. Back in 2015, Ryu Nakayama served as main animator and action director on one of my favourite Tatsunoko shows, Yatterman Night, and it introduced me to his style of fight scene which prioritises weight and momentum. Every movement flows into the next, and you're never left wondering what just happened. The director of Yatterman Night was Tatsuya Yoshihara, who now, in a grand turnabout, is Ryu Nakayama's action director on Chainsaw Man, and the result is a mix of their joint specialities. Legible combat that's both superhuman and grounded in reality. I particularly like this scene in episode 4. Animated by Naoki Miyajima, who worked on a part of my favourite Babylonia scene, it's a great example of CSM's momentum. We don't take our eyes off Denji for a second here, and the shots flow together beautifully. Chainsaw Man may be a favourite child, but even sans production committee, the show is still a mountain range with many tall peaks rather than a plateau of consistent highs. There are episodes 4 and 8 which feature some of the best scenes of the year, but the team struggled to match this ambition, particularly later on. One of the things some might point out is that large parts of the final Denji Samurai Sword fight were CG. But honestly, the digital look of MAPPA shows has improved a lot, in regards to both compositing, which I felt was kind of lackluster in the Jujutsu Kaisen TV series, and 3D, which was a lowlight of Inuyashiki a few years back. This is always the part of the show that's going to take the most flack. 3D is never going to look as good as the 2D animation skills on display here, but for a character as detailed as Chainsaw Man, it's absolutely necessary, and I honestly think we've gotten a result that's more than we could have asked for, blending it well with the 2D work. I alluded to it earlier, but not everyone shares these opinions. For many, this isn't the look they were hoping for from the adaptation, with some wanting something vibrant and flashy like the covers of the manga. Before watching the show, it's something I would have agreed with. A Wes Anderson-esque Chainsaw Man absolutely would have worked. But I also believe that if you're going to assemble a super team like this, you've got to just let them pursue their own vision. And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't just work, it redefines the show. It's more than just an homage to Fujimoto's love of film. It's a narrative device in itself with its own motifs and messages. And the fun thing about it is that it's not just their vision that we get to see. With 11 unique endings comes 11 new visions for what Chainsaw Man could have looked like. It's an assembly of great ideas from the industry's top young artists, Hitomi Kariya, Masanobu Hiraoka, Cole Owl, because, and this goes for the whole show, as far as Chainsaw Man's team is concerned, it doesn't matter if you have years of experience at your belt. If you can deliver, you're welcome. Thanks for watching the Canipa Effect, but before I go, I'd like to thank these incredible people for supporting the channel. In particular, I'd like to thank Alan Bakero, Austin Hardwick, Biopower, Chris Boylan, Dedameat, Eddie Leheka, Equinoctes, Frizzy Canadian, Frogkun, Jacob Bosley, JR Pictures, Mike Tamborelli, My Own Mother, Rylan Taylor, Studyoy, Tomo Roman, and Tiago Nesamentu. If you want more videos like this, then please visit patreon.com/thecanipa effect.